This program is brought to you by Emory University.
The diversity of one person can just be so vast. How do you get all of that in one sheet of paper?
We are Black and Asian, but we are kind of mixed with like other things too. Like actually we're kind of mixed with Italian, but Native American, but there's not really like another box to put
I know my children think totally different. They don't even see color.
Being Chinese and being American, knowing that I don't necessarily fit in exactly to either culture.
To identify that we are different, but also respect it, and to know that underneath all of that, we're all people.
I think there's been a new America in every decade since the country's founding. So for me, new America is just part of the continuing evolution of the nature of this country.
I always say I'm African American and Danish. I don't have an investment in whiteness, and I don't feel like I have a piece of white American identity. The whiteness I have just happens to be from Denmark.
I don't identify myself as white because I grew up in New York in an area that you were either Irish Catholic or Jewish. And over time, I always thought of white people as white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And I didn't know very many of them at the time.
I'm African first, Asian second, Indigenous third, and mixed with my Caucasianness, that's what makes me brown.
I'm Korean American. My wife is Chinese American. We've been married for 2 years and we just had a daughter about a year ago.
When I say Black, that encompasses my African brothers and sisters. It also encompasses my Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. But if I were to say African American, it's a little more limiting. So when I identify as Black.
I think what we need to do is to think, instead of categories, to think of stories and the ways in which our stories have been lost and the ways in which we're losing each other when we don't reclaim them.
A lot of people use melting pot, but in where I came from, nobody ever lost their ingredients. It's like a mixed salad, like where the lettuce stays the lettuce, the tomato stays the tomato, the onion stays the onion, the olive stays the olive. And in my neighborhood, we were kind of like, tossed.
Growing up being Black and middle class, there's also a sense of an identity crisis. You don't fit in with the white counterparts because you're of a different race. And then you don't fit in with Black counterparts because you guys have different class experiences.
I did not feel class until I was drafted into the Army. And although I had finished college and a year of graduate school, I was an enlisted man. Therefore, I was lower class in the Army and got a sense of what that means. And I think that's a very important element.
And at age 11, for the very first time, I was confronted with this question, what are you? And I learned after some time what they meant was not what are you, like what is meaningful to you, what do you love in the world? What they meant was, what are you, Black or white?
I've always been confronted with the question, where are you from? And then even if you explain, well, I'm from San Francisco, they'll always follow up with, no, where are you really from?
The term New America means to me that America is ever evolving. Things are changing daily. And so I would probably move away from using the term New America and say the ever evolving America.
What I would hope for in New America would be this elasticity to open up to other experiences, not to prejudge, but to bring them in and see what happens. And I think it's a very positive aspect.
For me, it's an exciting America. It's a new vision of America that in many ways transcends race. And ultimately, I think it points to where we want to go.
Good evening, and thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, for welcoming all of us here to Atlanta. It's great to be here. I'm Wolf Blitzer. I host a show on CNN called The Situation Room, and for all practical purposes, You're in the Situation Room, because wherever I am, it's the Situation Room. Welcome to this inaugural inception of CNN Dialogues, and I'm thrilled that Jim Walton, our leader, invited me to host this first ever CNN Dialogues here. As many of you know, CNN Dialogues is a partnership with the James Weldon Johnson Institute of Emory University. Atlanta's National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And CNN. My personal favorite news organization. This event is a platform for a series of citywide public dialogues with major figures shaping our time, and it's only just the beginning. This is going to be an exciting adventure for all of the people of Atlanta. As the capital of the South and as a city that has undergone enormous changes, enormous growth over the last half century, Atlanta is ideally positioned to host this public discourse. The conversations will be blunt. They will be very, very important. They will function as a vital source of information for the residents of Georgia's capital in their search for insightful analysis and perspectives on significant issues and events, and you will see that unfold over the next 90 minutes. We hope you will find tonight's discussion enlightening and informative. With that in mind, let's get to the dialogue right away and introduce our panelists. First of all, before I introduce the panelists, you know the subject tonight, the 2010 Census and the new America. What does the census tell us about who we are and how we live? That's what the subject is. We've got a great panel. Let me introduce the panel. Heidi Durrow is the New York Times bestselling author of The Girl Who Fell from the Sky. If you didn't read it, you should. She's also the co-founder and co-producer of the Mixed Roots Film and Literary Festival. Let's give it up for Heidi. Edward James Olmos is an award-winning actor, director, and activist. His most memorable roles, and God knows there have been so many of them that all of us have grown up with, include teacher Jaime Escalante in Stand and Deliver, and the patriarch Abraham Quintanilla in Selena. Edward James Olmos. Yul Kwan is the host of the upcoming PBS series America Revealed. He's also the winner of the CBS reality show Survivor, Cook Islands. Wow. There's Chris. Chris Marsh is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Maryland and a member of the affiliate faculty of the Maryland Population Research Center. Chris Marsh. Dana White is a professor in the Graduate Institute of the Liberal Arts School at Emory University, not very far away from where we are right now. He's an urban historian who has lived in Atlanta since 1970. Professor Dana White. All right, I don't know if you've had a chance to really review the results of the 2010 census, but I've spent some quality time doing that and spent some quality time looking at how the American census every 10 years has evolved. One of the most significant changes was back in 2000 when people could choose, for the first time in our history, people could choose more than one box for race, selecting what race they are on the census form. First question to Chris. Why did the Census Bureau decide to let Americans choose more than one box?
The reason why they wanted Americans to be able to choose more than one box is because the census wants to make sure that it's encompassing of everybody in America. So if you are both black and white on the 1990 census, you had to either choose. You had to choose if you were going to check off the black box or the white box. So they said if they go to the 2000 census and then they allow you to check multiple boxes, it will then allow us to be more encompassing of who all exist in America.
All right, let's go. What box did you select?
I selected the black African American Negro box.
Okay, Heidi?
I chose two. I chose white and black African American Negro.
Explain.
Well, my background is as someone who has a white mother, white Danish mother, immigrant, and an African American father. And I really did struggle over how I was going to identify on the census, because I understand the census is not necessarily the place that you should be doing your self-identification, because what it's about is figuring out how many representatives you have in your district. It's about apportioning monies. But in a lot of ways, it's also important to make sure that people know that there's mixing going on. And for a long time, we let ourselves forget that. And so after much struggle, I decided to choose two. I understand our president didn't, and I think that's okay. I think it's very much about self-identification, but for me, it was important to pick two.
The president, President Obama, has a white mother, had a white mother, raised by her and his white grandparents, a black father from Africa. He picked black. He did not pick mixed race, multiracial, or anything like that.
And there was a lot of controversy around this, because I think a lot of mixed race people felt like he sold us out in a lot of ways. That in his first press conference, he said, you know, a mutt like me, and that was the kind of the wink to us that he was going to continue this conversation. Very honestly, I didn't know what he would pick, but I'm glad he chose the thing that was important to him. He's always said, I consider myself an African American because that's how the world sees me, and I'm okay with that, the way that he chooses to identify, but I'm glad I had the choice to choose two. Although, I have to say, I wish I had been able to say, I am not white American culturally. The culture that I pick is the Danish culture, but if you want to talk about the blend, the reason I'm this mocha latte color, it is because my mother is white-skinned and my father is brown-skinned.
You sound white American culturally.
Oh my goodness, this is...
Don't you?
We're going to get into the situation, aren't we? Uh-oh.
Does she sound more...
You don't sound very Negro.
Yeah.
Did he just say that I talk white?
Wow. She doesn't talk. She doesn't talk Danish. She doesn't sound Danish.
Ja,
Right?
men det kan jeg også gøre. Jamen, taler du dansk? Fordi
Now
det
she's
godt
sounding
være det.
Danish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so interesting because what we're talking about really is boxes, right? But the boxes bleed over. There's so much more interest in the margins beyond the boxes. So white, Danish, African American, from Texas even, I think, is an important distinction.
I guess if you spoke with a Danish accent,
Maybe.
that would be different to me.
Okay.
All right. Edward, what did you pick? What box?
Mexican American Chicano, which both my parents are Mexican. And my mother was born here, so I'm second generation on my mother's side.
Okay. You?
I guess mine's easy. I was Korean. One box.
One box for Korean.
Yep.
Professor?
Guess.
No.
Professor,
I felt discriminated against. By
you've heard a little bit of the preliminary discussion, and we're just getting started. Do these boxes accurately reflect our society in the United States of America?
Which professor?
Dana.
I don't think so. I really don't. I'm glad that there's more choice now, but it's too much either or. And I think it was Heidi who said the story is really what counts. What's behind this experience? That's what I would value the most. But as an historian, it's useful to have these categories.
Can I chime in?
Yes, please.
So are these boxes accurate? I think the census does the best job that they can do. But there's a difference between what you self-report and how you're perceived in society. Mm-hmm. So I may self-report as white, but all day long, people are going to see me as a black woman. First of all, it's hard to try to, society is dynamic, so try to check off boxes, it's problematic. But census is the premier census that we have, the premier data set that we have. But it's all about perception. It's not always about how I identify, but how will I be perceived. And that gets lost sometimes when you say, well, I'm black, but you aren't perceived as black. Especially when you talk about multiracial or biracial.
Well, you know, I want to raise this issue, Chris, because there was an effort to get this word multiracial on the census form. It failed.
Right.
Was that a good idea or a bad idea? Do you think there should have been a box that said multiracial?
I'm not going to say whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea, but what I will say is that people often want to know how to characterize people. So when you say multiracial, they're like, well, what races? So multiracial is just not enough. So I think that's kind of problematic in that sense, because to just say multiracial, people are going to want you to. So what's going to happen if it ends up on the census? it's going to say multiracial and then list. Because multiracial is just too encompassing. They want to make sure they understand how to break that down. Because at the end of the day, they want to be able to still put you in some type of category.
Does everybody agree that it would have been a bad idea to have one box that said multiracial?
Yes.
Yes.
I worry that there would be a caste system in some way that, what counts as multiracial then? I mean, how are you doing the math on that identity? I do believe that it's a better situation to have all the boxes that you can check.
The specific ones. Edward, how do you distinguish between race and ethnicity?
Well, first of all, you asked the wrong person. Because, I'll tell you what. I believe that race, there's only one race, and that's the human race. And inside the human race, there are ethnicities, there are cultures, but there's only one race. And this is really the issue that we're facing today. Because there are a lot of intellectuals that will fight me to the ground to make sure that they, pontificate on how there are races, that there's an African race, Latin race, an Asian race, an indigenous race, Caucasian race. But that was brought about by a decision of us to encompass that word and use it that way. And you can go back to, the Greeks. They had their way of putting us into different, groups. And, but really, there's only one race. So racial discrimination, to me, is when a bug doesn't like me. That's racial discrimination. When I don't like him because of his ethnicity, then that's discrimination, period. The usage of the race is a unifying word, and if we don't start using it that way, we're going to really come into a very difficult time.
So what I hear you saying, Edward, is that you're not even convinced, and maybe I'm misreading what you're saying, is that as far as the U.S. Census is concerned, they need to know all this specific information about all of us.
Yes, they do.
You do think so?
Oh, yeah. I think they do need to know that, and they need to celebrate it, not let it be destructive, because those changes that are coming are true. The Latin American culture will be dominant within 50 years. In 20 years, we're going to be 1/3 of the population. And that change is frightening to people. We're not ready for it. If I was to ask anybody in this room to name me one United States national hero that you've studied any time in your life, male or female, born in the United States of America, of Asian ancestry, name me one that we as a group say thank you to. Name me one. If it wasn't for Martin Luther King, there would not be one person of color that we say thank you to as a nation. And that is what really hurts my children and my children's children and my children's children's children. Wolf.
Well, can I chime in?
Sure you can. Chime in
by
on
the
your
way,
own.
don't be shy on this.
Okay.
On this one.
Okay, got it.
I want to hear from all of you. And to those of you out there, you're going to have your chance too, so just calm down. We're going to take questions from the audience. Go ahead.
You talked about the intellectual, how the intellectual might want to look at race a little differently. And so I felt obligated as an intellectual to say that race, which is a discussion that we may not necessarily want to have here, but race can be seen as a social construct. It really doesn't exist. There really aren't any racial differences. And someone asked the question, preparing for this, would you want to see a race-blind or a race-free society? And I'm real hesitant to say, I would love to see that one race, we're just a human race, but the reality is that there are racial differences when we think about wages. There's a wage penalty for blacks. Blacks make less than whites. There's a gender penalty as well. But talking about race, there's a wealth gap between blacks and whites. So I would love to see us go to a race-free America, but we're not there yet. What I'd like to see is a race-fair America. So you're not penalized for being of a certain racial and ethnic group. So that's what I would probably add to the discussion.
I would just say to that, basically, that once you start to use the word race as a cultural determinant, you've lost. Because it divides us. And the word itself is a unifying word. It means the human race. And then we took it from that and started to divide it back thousands of years ago. And then in 1471, the dictionary finally described it and defined it the way we use it today. And I'm sorry, but that's our perception of it. It was not meant to be that. We've made it that. We have to unmake it, because as far as I'm concerned, ethnicity covers, culture covers, our learned behaviors, and our color of our skin. Everything. But there are how many DNA patterns? 6? And we're all part of the same family. So we really have to come to terms with this. And I know that there are people right now that are completely not with me. But that's okay, because the change is, it's always been here and it always will be. The only thing that's constant is change. It's going to change on you.
So you will, I know you want to.
I just want to, as an aside, I actually did pose a question that Mr. Olmos asked. I've gone on the street and did kind of a man on the street thing where you ask people, name a single prominent Asian American leader, and everyone draws a blank. You keep on pushing them, and the answer I get most frequently is Kim Jong-il.
Can you imagine what would happen if we had our ability to say thank you to the Asian influence on the American culture? If it wasn't for the, when I say I go to Indian reservations and I sit there and I'll say, you know, I am indigenous, okay? I am Mexica, Maya, Olmeca, okay? So I'm indigenous. Now, 500 years ago, I was mixed with my Caucasianness, but my root comes from Asia. That's how I cannot forget my grandparents who were Asian. And just like I can't forget my grandparents who were African. Who does not like their grandmother? Enough to not say thank you to her. Please. And why wouldn't you say thank you to your ancestors? And where do your ancestors come from? Africa. So say thank you to Africa. And say thank you to the Asianness of us. The indigenous people have a big problem. They kind of like, they think it's a white man's theory that they come from Asia. I say, okay, look at yourselves.
Heidi, you've done a lot of writing about being biracial. It focuses a lot of your work. Is America, the people here in Atlanta, all over the country, are people more comfortable with biracial Americans?
More than when I was growing up.
Let's say 20 years ago.
I think so, and I think it's because our president is biracial. He talked about it, at least during his candidacy. We have movie stars and sports figures who actually recognize that. I remember growing up watching The Cosby Show and looking at Lisa Bonet and thinking, oh my God, she's mixed like me, but she's playing African American. That's my role. I need to play African American just like she does. And there wasn't a lot of room for me to be both African American and Danish. You know, there's no room for Afro-Vikings in the society in 1980s. Which is very sad, of course, because we have great T-shirts. You know, so I do think things are changing in some ways. I have a nephew who is African American and Filipino. He's Blackapino. But he does not really identify that way. He identifies as black, although he has a very mixed crowd. He's 18 years old, and he thinks the whole mixed race thing is Auntie Heidi's thing, and he's not a part of it. So there must be something changing about the world. What I'm afraid of is that we're in this place where we're saying, okay, we're post-racial. Everyone's okay now. We're not post-racial. And if we
What about younger people in their teens or 20s or 30s? Are they post-racial in America?
I think they just don't know enough about their history. And I think that's really important, that we think about the ways in which...
But increasingly, younger Americans, they don't look at someone and say, oh, he's black or white or whatever.
Or they might say, oh, you know, my friend who is brown, or my friend who is tan, or something like that. I think that's true, except I think what they're losing is this real connection to a history that was difficult and traumatic for many, many years, and the ways in which we've shaped race. And we can't just say, okay, well, I didn't suffer any discrimination, and now we're okay, so let's just go forward and forget about that difficulty.
But
I think we have to keep the complication.
Professor White, there have been, and you've lived through these decades, enormous changes in attitudes over these years, and give us some thoughts.
One observation I would make is that I see a lot less self-segregation on campus. 20 or 30 years ago, you might see the Asian students together than the African American and the white. And there's much more mixing now and an unself-conscious mixing. These are just people of a generation. So I think there is a big change in that direction. It's a very, very healthy, a very easy manner in which they handle themselves.
Having said that, though, Chris, I don't know at the University of Maryland, but I go to a lot of schools all over the country. You go into the student union, you see the black kids sitting with the black kids, the Asian kids sitting with the self-segregation. You see it on major campuses. Do you see it at the University of Maryland?
I do, yes.
Why?
I'm not sure why. It probably has something to do with preferences, taste, and desires. And so maybe the students are deciding to integrate with people that have the same kind of taste and desires. Now, maybe it happens to be that blacks happen to have the same taste as them, so they're staying together with them in the cafeteria. Maybe it's not. I'm not quite sure, but I don't think we don't see this melting pot that you expect to see in a huge university at the University of Maryland. It may be different. It's different here in the South. But well, I guess Maryland's the South.
I can add some color to that. When I went to college,
you will go ahead.
When I went to college,
which college?
I went to Stanford, which has about 24% Asian American population, student population. I was confronted with the question of whether I wanted to join a fraternity, and if I did, whether I wanted to join an Asian American fraternity. Initially, I was inclined against it because I didn't see the purpose of self-segregating. I've always believed that if you want to be successful in this country as an ethnic community, you needed to integrate yourselves and figure out how to get into the corridors of power and the circles of influence that have historically been closed off to us. But when I got there, you just realize that there is a degree of cultural affinity. A lot of the people, when I was growing up, I often felt like an outsider. I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't feel like I was really Korean because I wasn't fluent. At the same time, I didn't feel like I was accepted as American because I looked like a foreigner. When I went to college, I was suddenly surrounded by other people who had gone through the same experience, and they could relate to what I went through in a way that other people couldn't. And so there was that tight bond. But I do think it's a mistake to overly self-segregate, because ultimately, in the Asian American community, there's something called the bamboo ceiling, where people, when they go out into the working world, Asian Americans do quite well in terms of getting into the entry-level ranks of large corporations. But for the most part, they hit a ceiling beyond which they won't get promoted into management. And part of the reason for that, they've done a lot of studies, is because we don't build the networks and the internal champions and the mentors that can push for you to get into the upper echelons of management. And that's something that we need to work on.
Is there more, maybe you want to answer this, self-segregation on college campuses today than there were 20 or 30 years ago?
Gosh, I don't know the answer.
Anybody have a thought on that?
Oh, I think there's less.
Less.
I really do. I mean, this is what I see every day.
Maybe possibly getting better.
Yeah.
Maybe.
You think it is getting better?
It could be getting a little
Edward?
bit.
It is getting better. Yeah, I think it's starting younger too.
I think it's getting better, but there's also within a lot of ethnic communities pressure for people not to integrate with the larger white community. In Asian cultures, you call them bananas, right? People who are yellow on the outside and white on the inside.
They're called Oreos for blacks.
Or
They're
Twinkies,
called Oreos.
right?
They're Oreos. Mm-hmm.
We're
Bananas.
coconuts, so what can I tell you?
You're making me hungry.
One of the interesting trends that we've seen recently is the growth of Hispanics, Chris, in the South, in the Midwest. And it's pretty, even in this area, it's very dramatic. Some of the fastest growing areas in the country for Hispanics are in the South. What's going on?
It's economics. There's economic opportunities here. So because of the economic opportunities, the Hispanics are actually coming here. There's also, typically when an immigrant comes somewhere, there's got to be an immigrant network that's there. All right, immigrant enclave that's there. And once it's well established, then other people will come. So because you have economics and you have immigrant communities already established here in the South, you're going to see a growth of Hispanics coming to that area.
Same story in the Asian American community. A lot of people come from other countries. They don't speak the language. So they gravitate towards community where there's a church, there's already a community to help them get integrated and get on their feet in the first place.
I know how the growth of the Hispanic community has really influenced the Washington, D.C. area where I live, Edward. It's had a dramatic impact, especially on young people who really feel if they want to get ahead in this world, they got to learn Spanish. Mm-hmm. They really appreciate that.
Oh yeah, I think that being multilingual is really the greatest gift, and we're capable of handling. It's been proven now. We can handle 4 languages at the same time being taught from the age of birth to 12 years old. We can handle being taught in 4 different languages at the same time without getting confused and ending up not being able to talk. But you know, we live in an English-only country, so we have a little bit of a problem. And yeah, it really nos ayuda mucho poder entendernos y poder hablar otro idioma. And people who talk more than one language really are actually trying harder to communicate, to be, you know, whenever I hear somebody with an accent, I say, man, thank you, man, because I'd hate to have learned English, you know, first. I'm glad I learned it first. It's one of the hardest languages to learn, to really speak it well.
So, can I bring up an anomaly on that, though?
Please.
Quoting not from a philosopher, but from a baseball manager. Ozzie Guillen points out that Japanese players who play Major League Baseball often have their own translators, they have their own food, but Spanish-speaking athletes have not been given those opportunities. So he raises the question, why is this so?
What's the answer?
I don't know. I'm not a manager, but it's a very interesting, and people think he tends to be very outspoken, as he should be, and people tend to think, well, there goes Ozzie again, but it's a very disturbing
There are a lot more Spanish-speaking players in Major League Baseball than Japanese.
Right,
Asian.
but they're not given, they're given no consideration if they're coming from the Dominican Republic or Nicaragua, wherever it might be. They're given no consideration as to the cultural difference that they're bringing in, whereas the Asian ball players are.
The Asian community, I got to tell you, is growing tremendously as well, and not just in San Francisco where you grew up, but all over the country right now. People are moving and they're looking for economic opportunities. Is that the main source, the main cause?
Immigration?
The fact that people are moving all over the United States.
Yeah, the Asian American community is the fastest growing ethnic community in terms of percentage growth. And you know, when they first immigrate to this country, again, they tend to go into one of 3 major metropolitan areas because it is well established, they'll have that community support. But increasingly, you're starting to see them go out to—
New York, San Francisco, or Los Angeles.
Right, exactly. Increasingly, though, they're going to different areas, including places like the South. Like Georgia, I believe, has the 5th fastest Asian American growing population in the country. It has the 2nd highest rate of Asian American business growth. So you're increasingly going towards areas where you find opportunities that haven't been exploited.
And the Asian growth has done enormously, you know, great benefits for all of these communities all over the country. I think it's fair to say. So, which raises the question: why is there such an uproar whenever you raise the question of illegal immigration, when we're all children of immigrants, basically, except for Native Americans? Why is there such a big uproar over the need for immigrants in this country?
No, I completely agree with that. I think it's a short-sighted view. I think a lot of people, I mean, you look at all across the country, you have states like Arizona, Alabama, even Georgia, passing these very, very stringent anti-immigration laws. And I don't think what people really understand is that we're a nation of immigrants. And we're going to have an aging workforce. We're going to need that pipeline of people to really allow this country to grow. And you know, you talk to any tech company in Silicon Valley, and their big issue is, well, we're bringing all these great, smart people here, educating them, but we're not allowing them to stay. So there's this brain drain where we're using our great educational resources to train these people, and they're going back to another country and making those countries more competitive.
You, Dana, you've been here for 40 years in Atlanta.
Yes.
So you've seen enormous changes demographically in this community.
Yes, when I came here, it was, strictly speaking, a biracial community. And the changes, particularly with the Latin community, have been really remarkable, and more the Asian. One of the differences, though, in going back to your 3 big cities, you have to remember the South was the poorest area of the country into the 1930s, 1940s. It did not really come out of, it was the first to go into the Great Depression. It was, Franklin Roosevelt spoke of 1/3 of the nation, which is ill-educated, ill-developed, and things of this sort. So there has been the possibility for development because the area was so undeveloped to begin with.
How will this, Heidi, affect America? All this enormous growth, different cultures, different races, different histories. How will this affect our country?
I think it's only good. I mean, it's only good news for us that we're integrating so many different people into our cities, into rural areas as well. And for me, because I'm a writer, I'm an artist, that means we have more stories. I think really that's where the richness is, where we actually get to connect with each other, that we see each other in the theoretical stranger, that someone can read my book and even though it's about a young girl who's Black and Danish, they can see themselves in that. And I think it makes us more human. I think it's a radical move ultimately for us to be together in this experience.
When did you decide you wanted to write this book and share your personal experience? Because there are a lot of young women like you out there who probably have similar experiences.
Well, I always wanted to write, and I always wanted to tell this truth that I didn't hear told before. And I started writing the book 12 years ago, when it took me 12 years to write it and get it published. Yeah, yeah. And mostly it was because publishers said no one can relate to a young girl who's half Black and half Danish. But then guess what? We have human experiences, and so people relate to it who are white people, in fact. White people relate to the book because they understand issues of grief. They understand issues of addiction. They understand issues of how do you make a family and what does a family look like? We're all struggling with those kinds of things.
How surprised was your publisher when your book became a New York Times bestseller?
They were pretty happily surprised. There was champagne involved.
Yeah, and hopefully some money too.
A little bit, tiny bit.
Good. You worked 12 years. You deserved it. Whatever it took. Chris, you wanted to weigh in on this?
No.
Oh. You looked like you were. You looked like you were anxious.
Well, I wanted to talk about the immigrant part because I think when we talk about immigrants, doesn't it conjure an image in your mind? And look, I mean, for me, I'm thinking about my mother, who is a white Danish immigrant. That's what I think of. But I think the people who are interested in passing laws, anti-immigration laws, they have a different idea, a different image of what an immigrant looks like than my mother. And that's what becomes so scary. So that if we can transform these words, these images that we have stored within us, I think it's super important. I remember I was talking to a group, my very first event as a published novelist, and it was in Chester, Vermont, which is not necessarily a diverse place. And I walked up to the podium at the Old Stone Church and I looked out at this group of 200 people and my first thought was, oh my God, these are all white people. They're never gonna get this. And I did the reading and it turned out really well and the book sold out. And I talked to all the people and I was so enchanted by them and probably half a dozen of these people said things to me like, oh, by the way, my granddaughter is biracial. Or my half-sister is half Latina. And it was a great check for me because here I think I have the right images in my mind about what these words mean. But I had made all these people just white people. But they weren't. They weren't just white people, and Black people aren't just Black people. And they had been given a story that allowed them then to say, I'm part of you. We're in the same tribe. We're in a family together. I understand what you're talking about.
One thing I don't understand is how, with respect to people's responses to immigrants, how they can make a mental distinction between people who speak English and who don't. I've been around people who've made fun of other Asians, even in front of me, and I'm saying, wait, what are you doing here, right? And they're like, oh, you're okay, because you speak English, you're one of us. But these people, they're fresh off the boat. And what they don't understand is, like, we all had to come from some boat, right? I mean, it's only a generation before you get assimilated into this country.
It's true. And it makes me upset. And Edward, I'd get your sense. When you hear people talking, really blasting the immigrants and the illegal immigrants, I mean, it must make your blood whatever.
I understand law. I understand the legality of what people are trying to enforce. I really believe that we migrated here. And started this hemisphere over 40,000 years ago. Indigenous people sprouted up here, and I was part of that. And so I greeted, my relatives greeted the first Europeans that came across, and they were the boat people, the original boat people. And we embraced them, we helped them. We tried desperately hard to understand and communicate. And we didn't speak their language, they did not speak our language. And then they went nuts. And their belief is that, that warring and the understanding of, people who live in a certain area doesn't belong to them really, they didn't pay for it. So it belongs to everybody, and they started to spread. when people get to me the most is when they stop realizing that their relatives are immigrants. And I don't care how far back, whether it be 10 generations or 20 generations back, you're going to have migrated here. And you would have had to have been helped. Now, we have those laws for a reason because we don't want to get overpopulated, but that's another issue. Because basically, I'll put it to you this way. What people here have to understand in this country is in 1990, when the census came out, I was called by Indianapolis. And a person called me from there and said, Ed, can you come to Indianapolis? I said, certainly. There was such a difficult moment in their voices. I said, what's going on? He says, well, it's not the fact that there's been an increase of 300% over the last 10 months of Latinos. I said, whoa, I better sit down. If that's not the problem, what's the problem? The problem was that all the reporters go around every 10 years, or every year actually, but this was the anniversary of the 10th year, so, and put down how many babies were born in this hospital, okay, how many males, how many females, what cultures, thank you very much. They found out that 52% of all the children being born in Indianapolis in 1990 were Latino. And it blew them out of the water. They were not ready. The biggest change that you're gonna feel is done by birth here, not by migrating here or immigrating here. It's by birth. So I get offended when people say to me, well, those immigrants. Immigrants, we're all that, but at the same time, stop for a second. Why are they coming here? I have a big problem with Mexico right now, especially. It's just horrendous what is going on there. And and it's a duality there because it's partly we are the ones who consume the drugs and need the drugs. So they're the ones who are making it possible for us to get the drugs. And then we have all the armaments, so we sell them the armaments and they kill each other and they blow each other up. And then we wonder what our participation is in this. They're really out of control over there. Guess what? We have to legalize drugs in this country. We have to stop. And let me tell you, that is not for applause because that's a big issue, huge issue.
All right, we're gonna move on to the next subject.
Quickly. So yeah, I get offended by people who poke fun at immigrants.
To those of you in the audience here, people in Atlanta, most of you I'm sure live in Atlanta. I want to ask everyone in the audience, if you'd like to, you don't have to if you don't want to. How many of you moved to Atlanta, were not born in Atlanta?
Oh my God. Wow. Oh my gosh.
I would say what that?
I would say 98%.
Yeah, 98%.
Audience here. And you know what it says about Atlanta?
Everything.
It's a great city. People
Yes.
want to live in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So let's give it up for Atlanta. Now, here is an interesting phenomenon, and I'm going to have Professor White explain this. It used to be, decades ago, African Americans would move from the South to Detroit, or my hometown of Buffalo, New York, or all the cities up north where there were manufacturing jobs, opportunities, maybe less racism or whatever. But now we are seeing an amazing trend of African Americans from the north moving back south.
Yeah.
What's going on?
I think it really began in the 70s, and I think part of it was a response to the early successes of the civil rights movement. Part of it is, you mentioned Detroit and Buffalo, they're being depopulated. You have major cities which are losing 50 to 60% of their population.
Detroit has lost more than half of its population. Yeah. I think Detroit at one point had a population of about 1.4 million. It's down to 700,000 right now. My hometown of Buffalo, in the 1960 census, the city of Buffalo had 680,000 people. In the most recent census in Buffalo, the city of Buffalo had 280,000 people. Yeah. So you can see a lot of those people from Buffalo and Detroit came to Atlanta and a lot of other cities in the South.
Yeah.
Better weather.
I think it's also, obviously it's the economics. These areas are not going to redevelop. I mean, there are plans to redevelop them. I don't see how a Detroit. One of the things I've read about Detroit, they're saying now it's almost like urban renewal in reverse. that people are so scattered through the city that they're talking about congregating them and concentrating on certain neighborhoods. Mayor Bing has this as a project. There are any number of factors. This is the South is the home place for many African Americans. My wife and I go to Columbia, South Carolina almost every August, and the hotel we stay in has family reunions of African Americans. They fill the hotels. So there are people who are coming from other parts of the country, and they come down here, and they find it more comfortable. The quality of life, there's also the question of weather and climate. Wolf mentioned his being from Buffalo. I lived in Buffalo for 4 years and came away with frozen ears. So when I got to Atlanta, I felt much more comfortable here. But there are any number of factors there.
Chris, you've studied this trend as well.
Yes. Wolf did some audience participation, so I'm going to go ahead and try it as well. So most of you guys said that you didn't have any. Raise your hand if you don't have any kind of like ties here with family here in Atlanta. Okay, great, perfect. It drives my point home. So there's two types of migrants that are coming back to the South. You have true return migrants, and those are people that are coming back to take care of family or to be a part of like their family. For the most part, they're probably going to migrate or they're going to move to like rural areas because they probably have like a large parcel of land. They're going to build their dream home. So you have those kind of return migrants. But you have these primary migrants as well. And these primary migrants are those that don't have any family ties, but they have family ties more of an ancestral kind of way. Okay, my ancestors came from the South, I want to come to the South, but you don't have a grandmother or a great-grandmother that lives here in Atlanta. What we're also finding about these primary migrants, which tends to be everybody in this room, you guys tend to be a selective group, and you're more educated, you're most likely going to have children, and you're probably most likely going to be married as well. So we do see two types of migrants. They are very different, and they're coming for very, very, very different reasons. And the primary migrants really, it seems like, again, economics is really driving it because you can get that dream house that you couldn't get up in the northeast area.
Is this return of large numbers of African Americans from the North to the South changing the South, the traditional South we're talking about right now? Chris.
It's a different kind of mentality, I think, coming here. You're looking for new opportunities, you're looking for new venues, you're looking for new environments. So I think it is a little bit different. But I think it also dovetails nicely in the comment we made before because the South has been, Atlanta in particular, has been very binary. There's this black-white dichotomy. So now you have Latinos, Asians, well-educated blacks that are moving back to the South. So this new South it's different. There is definitely a new South that's happening, especially here in Atlanta.
And it's not just Atlanta, but go ahead, Professor.
So I was going to say with Atlanta, they're moving to the counties that rejected mass transportation in the 1970s to keep African Americans out. Mm-hmm. So you have not just a suburban population, you have an exurban population. So they're beyond the inner ring of suburbs and moving out into other suburbs. That doesn't mean necessarily that the areas they're moving into will be integrated. There might be black communities, there might be integrated communities, so it will vary.
Right, so we know that segregation has decreased in Atlanta, in the South. For all major metropolitan areas, segregation between blacks and whites, I'm speaking of, it's decreased, and it's on a steadily decline. There is still segregation, but it's decreasing. So
when you say there is still segregation, what do you mean?
People still blacks aren't necessarily living with whites.
But are there like restaurants or schools?
Oh, I was talking about where you live, your home environment, where you actually decided, where you decided to buy a home.
What do you mean? Are there neighborhoods where blacks are not allowed to live? Is that what you're saying?
not allowed to live. If you look at the segregation literature, there's 3 reasons that the sociologists talk about for segregation. It's either economics, preferences, or it's discrimination. So for one of those 3 reasons, people still aren't living in very integrated neighborhoods. They're becoming more integrated, but they're not as integrated as they.
Has the election, Heidi, of our first African-American president?
Biracial.
I say African-American because his father was from Africa, his mother is from America. So he's African-American.
All right.
Has the election of our first African-American president really changed, affected attitudes in the United States on some of these sensitive issues we're discussing?
I do think so. I mean, I feel like as someone of color I look at the president and I think, wow, America is just a little bit more of me. I have a little bit more room in this world because we're able to look at him and say, this is a smart man, this is a man who can get things done, this is someone we want to believe in, and he looks something like me. And so I think it has changed in that way.
Can I pipe in here? I spent a lot of time going to different college campuses, encouraging young people, particularly minorities, to get registered to vote. And for years, it was like pulling teeth. I mean, these kids didn't care. They're thinking, my vote doesn't matter. I've seen a fundamental sea change when Obama ran. Suddenly, all these kids who never gave a damn got really excited. And it's not just within the African-American community. In the Asian-American community, kids got so ramped up because they're thinking, you know what, if he could do it, maybe I can do it in my generation too. And it's not just Obama getting elected, but he put in 3 Asian-American cabinet secretaries. That's something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And that made a huge statement.
I remember my grandmother, she's 94 years old, born in Texas, moved to Portland, Oregon in the 40s for the shipyards to do work there. And on the day of his inauguration, she drank champagne for the first time and wept because she never thought she'd see
let me
that
share
day.
with you just a personal moment in my journalistic career, maybe one of the most moving moments that I had. It was November 4th, 2008. I'm CNN's lead political anchor. It's 11 p.m. on the East Coast. I'm standing there. The polls had just closed in California, Washington State, and Oregon. We knew that Obama was going to win. We knew when Virginia and North Carolina and Indiana and Ohio and a whole bunch of other states went for Obama, but we couldn't say that until we didn't want to discourage people from voting on the West Coast. He needed 270 electoral votes, and we knew it would only be after 11 p.m. when the polls closed in the West Coast that we would be able to announce who the winner of the election is. So there I am at CNN election headquarters, and I knew it was coming, and I prepared myself exactly at 10:59 with 50 seconds. We do a flashing breaking news animation. We couldn't say anything until it was exactly 11 o'clock. And I say, after the music, the drama, breaking news, and the banner goes up on the big screen, the big wall behind me, Obama wins. I say, CNN now projects that Barack Obama will be the next president of the United States. And I say a few more sentences. They're watching me in Chicago, where Obama and his family are, thousands of people. But we're broadcasting all over the United States, indeed, all over the world. And here I was blessed with announcing this historic fact in our history that we've elected the first ever African-American president of the United States. Now, in the weeks that followed after this, I would travel all over the country on assignments, doing things, wherever I am, and black people would come up to me all the time, and they would hug me, and they would kiss me. especially older black people. And I didn't realize what was going on. And they would just say, "Thank you, Mr. Blitzer," or "Thanks, Wolf." And I'm not making this up. And I said, and it was a surprise to me because I didn't understand. But I said, why are you so grateful to me? And they would all say the same thing. These are hundreds of people just randomly coming up to me at airports or any place else. They would say, "Mr. Blitzer, because we didn't believe America would elect an African-American president until you said it." We always thought, and this is the scary part, we always thought, especially older African-Americans, that the white man would steal it. Just at the last second, they would do something, and they would steal this, and they wouldn't let us have an African-American president. But when you announced it to the world that Barack Obama was elected president of the United States, we started, whether Donna Brazil or anybody else, we started to cry hysterically. It changed our lives, and we began to see our country in a different light. All right? So that for me to hear that from people all over, that was pretty moving for a journalist, for a reporter. I was just reporting the news. But it was a very, very moving experience. So let me go through the panel, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. What does this say 3 years later? Is that excitement, that passion, that real historic turning point in our country still there?
I think we're moving toward it again in different ways, and I really think the great thing about the inauguration was that whereas people in the majority, white people, can often talk about race as if it's that faraway land. I feel like his inauguration and these 3 years, we're getting closer so that white people, the majority people, realize we're all sitting on the same land talking about this thing together. We're going through a difficult time as well, but I think we are still with that excitement. That's on to you.
Take race out of this question. The economics involved, the lack of jobs, it's been devastating. This has been one of the most difficult moments in my lifetime of 64 years of living. I didn't go through the Depression, but it couldn't be too far away from this. It's very difficult because the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and it's hurting all of us. And Barack, our president, is caught. It didn't matter who was president. Okay, that's why I said take culture out of it, because basically this is something that was self-induced. So right now, I don't think the hope is even close to where it was 3 years ago.
I do think we live in a different world. I think it's opened people's mindsets and paradigms in a way that had been done before. But just based on my personal experience, a lot of people have lost their energy. I think they were really hoping Obama would come in, not just transcend race, but transcend partisan politics, and he hasn't. And I think a lot of people are now disappointed and asking, what has he really done for our community? I've heard that in many different ethnic communities. And yeah, I think some people are disillusioned.
The excitement, I believe, is still there. The one point of caution, and you'll kind of touched on that, is I think that he was supposed to be our savior. And he's not the savior, he's a man. And he has his set of flaws. But I think the excitement is still there.
Yeah, I would make one point of comparison with his predecessor. People question his predecessor's intelligence quotient. No one really questions Obama's mind. They might question his beliefs or his thinking, but I think it's a terrible time too. And I did not make it to the Great Depression, and I sure hope we're not moving into one now. But I don't think his race is working against him in terms that we might have anticipated earlier.
All right, I know there are microphones here. I would love to hear from some of you if you have a question, and repeat the word question. This is what we call the Q&A, as opposed to the A&A. So please go ahead, take the microphone, introduce yourself, and ask the panel a question.
Hey, my name is Gregory Fricker. I'm from Emory University here. How do you feel about the validity of the distinction of hyphenated American for those born in the United States? And is that Americans, are we not all Americans? There is no hyphenated America. Knowing full well that the stories of someone's ethnicity is important, do you believe in the importance of the distinction of a hyphenated American?
All right, let's start with Heidi.
I had this difficulty when I first came to the States at age 11, having grown up in Germany and Turkey and spent my summers in Denmark with my mother's family. And I remember not understanding this hyphen, because when people said, "What are you?" the first thing that came to mind was either I'm the very best speller in my whole class, or it was I'm American. And when I said those things, I was just greeted with amazement. But what do you mean? What kind of American are you? I think we are all new Americans. Edward, you've been saying that all night tonight. We're all new Americans. And so I do have a little bit of trouble with that hyphen always.
Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, the hyphen to me has been, it grew. I think we were all Americans. And then when we didn't get an equal participation in this, what we call the United States of the Americas, that's when the hyphen had to take shape. You got to remember, when I was born in 47, by the time I hit the 60s, the Latinos in Mexico called us pochos. We were not Mexican. When we came across here, we were not American, so we were nothing. We were absolutely nothing. And so that's when the Chicano situation became a reality. And that's when the hyphen really took shape. And for me, I think that's what a lot of people have grown because of the fact that the hyphen, what it does, it accents, like checking more than one box. It accents who we are as human beings. And
I want to get to the audience, get some more questions, but there have always been these hyphens, Italian Americans, Irish Americans.
Always.
You know, so go ahead.
My name is Winston Johnson, and there's an entire segment of our population that one party has to condemn in order to be even considered as a candidate, and that segment encompasses every color and every ethnicity, and it's people who are homosexual. I had a 42-year relationship with a man who died 5 years ago, and I'd like to know when the panel thinks that we are going to become equal. You can't meet a person in another country and bring that person back to be your partner. Glenn Greenwald on TV, you probably know, Wolf is gay. He has to live in Brazil because he can't live here with the man he loves.
Winston, that's a very good question, and I'm sorry for your loss. The way I'd answer that question, like we had said earlier, the census is making small strides. So in 1980, I believe, you didn't even have unmarried partner on the census. So now by 1990, you can have unmarried partner on the census. That was more so for cohabitation, and now we have, by 2010, you can check more than one box. So be a little patient, and I think by 2020, you might see some things that look a little bit more representative of you.
I'll be 80.
You gotta stay around.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Well, first, thank you very much for a wonderful discussion. I'm Cedric Sussman, and I'm from South Africa. I often say I'm a true African-American now, in another way. That country is dealing with a very difficult problem of trying to redress past wrongs, or from what they call previously disadvantaged segments of the population, which happen to be the majority. What role do you think efforts to redress past grievances, particularly with respect to the African American population, might play in our discussions? You haven't mentioned that. We've lived through quotas in universities and in other institutions. Where is that heading? And should it be a completely color-blind and ethnically blind society? Can it be?
Who wants to take that question? Are you suggesting like reparations and stuff like that? Is that what you're
It's heading in that direction, yes. But I think we've seen it more in terms of quotas and access to education, for example, but there are others too.
I'll give it a shot. Okay. So if we think about reparations, which I am 100% for reparations, how are we actually going to define who deserves reparation? We don't, if you're talking about blacks or African Americans in this country, how are we going to define who is entitled to the reparations? And that's really just kind of a rhetorical question, because I don't know, because I guarantee if you ask everybody up here, we all have like some multiracial background somewhere, a couple of generations removed. So I'm not quite sure how reparations would actually manifest itself. Do I think it's necessary? Yes. But I just don't know logistically how you'd work it out. It'd be great if black folks didn't have to pay taxes ever again. Sign me up. I just don't know logistically how it would work.
I think practically speaking,
you can define black by black.
We got a lot of people asking questions, so I want to get to the questions. But practically speaking, given the budget deficits, let's not hold our breath. Not going to be any reparations. Go ahead.
I'm a doctor. I've been here 44 years, and Atlanta has changed in a positive way in reference to many of the things you mentioned, but in a very negative way in reference to health care. And the classism issue is so dramatic. Dialysis patients here. I had one, had to go back to Mexico because they closed the dialysis center, and she died 34 years old. She came over when she was 10. A black gentleman with cancer of the prostate, you've got to go home. You're not eligible for Medicaid until your cancer spreads. That's the law in this state. And we don't get the word out about it. The third case, a white guy, 43 years old, real bad high blood pressure, has to be admitted to the hospital. He's in heart failure. When he's discharged, they don't have to give him one pill. So his medicine, he doesn't have the money for medicines. His blood pressure zooms back up. He bleeds in his eyes, and he's blind now because of that. And children from other countries, born in other countries needing health care in this city, there is a definite gross discrimination against them getting health care. And they come over here and they're 5, 7 years old, and they need health care. So what I wonder is why this outrageous situation doesn't get hardly any media attention, and these people die and suffer unnecessarily.
Thank you. Anybody want to answer that?
I just have to agree. I mean, why?
There's a lot of outrageous things happening in our country, unfortunately, still, and we'll see how that unfolds in the coming years with the new healthcare law that was passed, but most of it hasn't yet taken effect. We'll see if that makes a difference. But you make fair points. Go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Anthony Mitchell, and I'm an inner city pastor. And the question that I have is that I went to Morehouse, I went to Harvard Divinity School, and I literally took, when I was at Morehouse, when Martin Luther King said, he said, get up, get all you can, and go back. Okay, so I've done that, and I'm in the inner city. And I'm wondering, is it really more class than it is race? Here we are 50 years after Brown versus the Board of Education, and the school system is still separate and unequal. Practically 40 years after the death of Martin Luther King. And we're, as a poor people, as an African-American people, as a minority people marginalized, we're worse off today than we were in the 60s. Yeah. So the question that I'm asking, when are we going to resurrect, or should we resurrect that dream that Martin Luther King had, which was multinational, multicultural, and get back to this poor people's campaign? Because you're right, the rich are getting richer and the poor is getting poorer. And after these marginalized resources are depleted, I hate to see literally a class war. So again, I'm asking, is the issue really race or is it really classism?
Fair question. Dana.
Class is critical. When I went through the questions for this, I kept writing class, class, class as I went down the list. Right. Because when we're talking about these larger groups, we're masking that there are variations within these larger groups. And this has to be faced up to. There's absolutely no question about it. I certainly agree with you.
I would just echo what he's saying. And as a minister, so the Bible tells us the poor is going to be with us always. But it's hard to disconnect class from race. I can't in good conscience disconnect the two because they're so intertwined, because you do see a high proportion of blacks that happen to also be poor. So you can't disconnect the two. So it's a melting of the two in my world.
Anybody else want to answer?
Education is the key. Yeah. 1000%. I said at the very beginning of this, I said that, name me one United States national hero that we've studied any time in our lives, male or female, born in this country, of Asian or Latino or, indigenous. We don't have them. We don't teach our children. Right now in Arizona, they just finished passing a law in Tucson educational system there, the public school system, where they took out Latino studies from high schools. And they were graduating 95% of every child that went through that system was graduating, and they took it out. Now there's a problem, because they were saying, oh, these people are teaching leftist propaganda and all this, and what they were teaching them was other than U.S. history the way we teach it here. 97 to 98% of all the history that you study from the first grade through the 12th grade is European American studies, period. That's it. Now, if I gave you a vitamin, just one vitamin, but that's the only vitamin I gave you, and I gave it to you for 18 years, you would die. And that's what our children are doing. They're dying.
I'll just add something real quick, too. There was a very interesting study that came out recently, which I'm sure you probably heard about, but showing that the impact of the economic recession has been disproportionately felt on ethnic communities. So the median household income for whites declined about 16% since the economic recession began. For African Americans, it was in the mid-50s. For Asian Americans, in the mid-50s. For Latinos, it was about 66 to 68%. And the reason for that is because a lot of ethnic minorities have their wealth tied up in their homes. And as home prices have precipitously declined, their net wealth has gone down drastically compared to whites who are more diversified. So again, the two can't be extricated
Minister,
from each
thanks
other.
very much for what you're doing. We have some people up in the balcony with a question. Go ahead.
It's an interesting discussion on education. In Stand and Deliver, Mr. Olmos, you played a role in which you looked at how race relations in education are sort of dealt with. I would be curious how you guys feel that the Hollywood and the media have informed the discussion on race relations, and what sort of impacts mass media has had, particularly in the entertainment sector.
Well, we happen to have a great actor here from Hollywood who can answer that question brilliantly in 60 seconds.
They call it the entertainment business, not social consciousness. So we don't do enough. We try like crazy. It took us 5 years to do Stand and Deliver. It took us 10 years to do Walkout. It took me 18 years to do American Me. All of them are films that really have changed the course of the people who have seen them, and they're really relevant. There's no greater impact, to finish it off, than the audiovisual event when it's projected on the big screen with no peripheral vision and Dolby stereo sound all the way around you. It goes directly into your subconscious mind and it'll stay there. That's how come when you saw Jaws, you didn't go jumping in the ocean right away.
Let's give him a big round of applause for answering that question in 60 seconds. By the way, that was a rehearsal. On September 12th, mark your calendars, I'm going to be moderating the next CNN Republican presidential debate in Tampa, and all of the Republican candidates will have 60 seconds to answer the question, and then 30 seconds for rebuttals. So he could be a presidential candidate. He answered it in 60 seconds.
The first Latino president will be a woman.
You have a name you want to give us?
Yeah. I know. She's the Secretary of Labor right now.
Okay.
In about 6 years, guys.
It's Hilda Solis is the Secretary of Labor, for those of you who don't know.
My name is Sarah Musazadeh, and I'm originally from Iran. I was born there, and I immigrated to America, so I'm Persian American. Growing up, I've always loved my Persian culture. I love the music, the food, the dancing, everything. But I always remember that I always tried to assimilate to the American culture as well. I always want to be American, the clothes, the outfits, the songs, everything. Now that I'm a bit older, I see that I can share both worlds, and I've sort of blended them both. But growing up in the South as a Persian American has also allowed me to experience things a bit differently in regards to economics per se. But when I go to communities or visit my families in New York or California, we don't share the same experiences. I think the way they grew up and where I grew up economically, class-wise, it's not the same. So how can we continue to share those community interests and those passions that we have in regards to our cultures, and at the same time build bridges of understanding on class standards or economics?
Heidi, this is a perfect question for you.
Local and regional
Hold on, Dana.
culture-
Heidi, then you.
Oh, pardon me, I didn't hear. Local and regional culture are very important.
Dana, go ahead.
I grew up in New York, Irish Catholic. The Boston community, Irish Catholic community, was totally different. There was a link, but it was different where you grew up, and there's no question about it. We don't look at that often enough, really.
I was going to say, we created a festival so that people could converge once a year and talk about all the ways we're mixed in different ways around the country and, in fact, around the world. I mean, the exciting thing is that you're growing up in this age of the internet and social media and Twitter, and you're connected in that way as well, so that the conversation is not just at the holidays and it's not just at the summer vacation, it's happening all year round. And so I encourage you to keep that conversation going, because there's a very different way to be black in Portland, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest than there is in Atlanta, I think. And there is something great to be learned about that. I mean, that's one of the great discussions I want to have, that there are so many different ways to be African American. There are so many different ways to be white or to be Asian or to be Persian American as well.
Thank you.
It's a phenomenal panel, and I wanted to thank you all for this evening. I have a question that I think is very disturbing for me as an American, watching other Americans fight and push back against legal immigration. I don't know if you've noticed in the past few weeks, but there's been an aggressive advertising campaign on one of the more conservative news channels, I'll just say, that has an advertising group that's supported by labor unions and by those in the right wing, pushing against legal immigration for the first time, and taking people to a website and pushing this notion that we should clamp down on legal immigration to the United States. We've had au pairs, and watching them grow up and develop has been phenomenal. They love coming to America. They love becoming American, and they only stay here legally, or they go back home if they're out of time. What are your feelings as a panel on this new issue that's just now come to the forefront with this new movement?
I don't think it's a new issue. I think it's just fear. I mean, it's just more and more fear that people feel like they're losing something, and then they want to close the circle, right? And so we just express that in different ways. I'm horrified by that, absolutely.
I think it would be a gross mistake to close our borders. I mean, immigrants are the pipeline of talent and innovation and energy that this country needs. And if we close our borders, I think we're just hurting the country.
Yeah. The Economist argues that among what they call the rich countries of the world, the United States has one of the best futures because it has so many young people. And the young people are the children of many of these immigrants. So we are ahead of many European and Asian countries as far as they're concerned.
Yeah,
So it's a matter of perspective.
Look at places like Japan, which has been stagnating. Part of the problem is that they have an aging workforce and they don't have enough young children or immigrants coming into their country.
Good question, thank you.
Good night, my name is Naomi Haynes and I'm from South Atlanta School of Law and Social Justice. My question is directed more towards Heidi. Earlier you stated that as both first generations and later generations interact with each other, you think that we let go of the difficulties and the struggles that our ancestors felt. And to me, I just feel like, should I hold on to whatever my ancestors struggled? They struggled it, I feel sorry for them. I'm glad that we've moved on from that period, but I'm thinking when I'm interacting with Chris or you, Heidi or Wolf or whatever, I don't care about your race. You respect me, I'll respect you. If we can interact in a respectful manner and become close friends, I don't think it should really be based upon whatever our ancestors struggled about. Why is that a big issue? Especially when we have this new face of America and we're trying to head towards a place in where race, or as Mr. Colmos would say, ethnicity doesn't play a big part.
Well, I love that you're part of
I'm
this.
sorry.
Yes.
And you also stated that you think we don't really know about our history, and I'm a history student, love it, know it, so just to clarify.
I mean, of course, there's an exception, and I'm so glad that you're here tonight because obviously you're part of the dialogue and you've educated yourself on certain issues. I'm talking about the young people that I know, that I've been in touch with around these issues, and I think there's a lot of times a willful ignorance. So I'm glad you're out there. I hope you're out there blogging as well and sharing what you know about the world. When we're talking about the individual interactions that people have with each other, certainly you don't have to have the image of lynchings in your mind when you're talking to Wolf. You don't need to have that. But nevertheless, I mean, it is important to know that history. It doesn't necessarily affect that interpersonal reaction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good answer. All right, let's go back up to the balcony.
I'm Bridgette Philpott, and I will confess that when I came here this evening, I thought this conversation would be about the many insights that we have mined from the 2010 census. But it seems that it's along the dimension of race, and so I'll stay with that theme. Personally, I define diversity along many dimensions. But I do have a question for the panel, and it is the following. I've heard it said that the most segregated hour in the country is the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday morning. And I struggle with that a lot, because I ask myself, is this about the realm of common experience and does it need to change? Or, and this is where I'd like the panel to weigh in, or are there some deeper psychosocial undercurrents that are driving that tendency, yet in this sort of environment where we are talking about multiple boxes to be checked on the census and a black president and, you know, glass ceilings shattering, et cetera, et cetera. The question is, are there, in your opinion, deeper psychosocial undercurrents that drive the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday morning toward its current state of substantial segregation?
I would just answer, to begin with, that we are in what was often called the Bible Belt. And the South was mainly a Protestant society on both sides of the color line. So you did not have the kind of religious diversity here, again, until fairly recently, that you had in many other portions of the country. So I think this is a major element, and the churches have been very strong in the area.
Are the churches in Atlanta, and you guys can answer this question, segregated, practically self-segregated, or are they mixed?
Self-segregated.
Basically. Yeah. White churches, black churches. Okay, let's take another question.
Okay, first of all, great panel.
But let me just point out that we are talking about the results of the 2010 census and the new shape, the new image, the new look, the feel of the United States, and that's how we got into all of this, but go ahead.
Okay, and thanks y'all for bringing this here. My name's Perry Goodfriend. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He died in 2009. So obviously I'm the child of immigrants. He lived to see the 2008 election, and one thing I'll always remember is after the election was over, he was very, very, very proud to live in a country where a man named Barack Hussein Obama could be elected president. And to me, that says that for him, the part of the American ideal wasn't just to be successful, but that America is a collection of a bunch of different groups of people that can all be successful together. And I wanted to just drop that in there. And basing that, I mean, that's sort of a new paradigm. And y'all talked about self-censorship, it's not self-censorship, segregation, thank you. Self-segregation. Y'all talked about self-segregation, and one of the things I'm wondering is, won't there be a policy gap? I mean, don't we have a lot of policymakers that are working under an older paradigm that even if people are self-segregated or trying not to self-segregate or trying to integrate communities, that they're going to be running up against these policymakers? And isn't there a risk of attrition? I mean, people have to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing through. How do we keep that from happening, and how do we make the policymakers engage more with the younger paradigm?
Edward.
Oof. You know, again, I got to go back to one. It's called education. We have to educate ourselves to understand what you just said. You know? The paradigm of the old and the new is what we're talking about, and the change is coming. Hopefully that the new are educated enough, the young people, to be able to really come across it and make the changes that have to be made in the future. I, like your father, was extremely happy with the 2008 election. And I think that we deserved it as a people. See, you know, In 1984, the Olympic came to Los Angeles. 140 nations came speaking 105 languages. And when they got to the United States and when they got to Los Angeles, all 140 nations were already represented by Los Angelinos, and all the languages were already spoken there. This country is a great country because of the fact that we represent a really milestone in collaboration and being able to live together.
And let's not forget, and hold your applause for a second, when Barack Obama wanted to become president of the United States, the first contest that he won was not in New York or California or Illinois, it was in Iowa. And I was just there, I interviewed him there 2 weeks ago in Iowa, and we drove through Iowa on a bus. Not a whole lot of black people in Iowa. I got it, yet he won the caucuses in Iowa. And that says a lot about our country, and let's not lose sight of that. All right, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Giovanna Jones. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm now a freshman at Emory University. And I also would say that I represent a growing demographic of students who come from very different backgrounds, very different socioeconomic statuses, but who are receiving a very elite education. This is very much a growing demographic. I come from a prep school, that type of situation. So I also think that there's a very similar culture within that. And so coming from that culture, I've definitely noticed a lot of colorism, you know, and an emphasis on looking racially ambiguous in what is beauty and what do we find aesthetically pleasing in our generation. And so it's hard for me to say that we're a post-racial generation, because I think that just as much as we feel we can be professional and make it in this country, there's also that development of feeling beautiful and social and that aspect of growing together. And so I guess my question is basically for Chris and Heidi. How do you feel these aesthetic values could possibly be a hindrance to my generation's post-racial attitude?
Girl, I straightened my hair today. I haven't figured it out. My hair, it's naturally curly, but I think it looks more professional to wear my hair straight. So I can't say that I am able to shift out of this paradigm, but it's great that we're talking about it, right? That we can say, yes, there's still colorism. Yes, there's still this idea of exotic beauty. Especially as a woman, to talk about the ways in which we're hindered even by notions of sexuality and erotic identity and beauty in so many ways. I wish I had some answers. I'm still trying to figure all of that out myself, but you're having that conversation young too, so maybe you'll figure it out for us, I hope.
Chris.
To add on to Heidi's point, so we talked about colorism, and then we also know that we have biracial women. So brown sisters, I was like, we're having it pretty kind of bad now. If you think about colorism in Black America, brown sisters are going.
I'm light-skinned as
right. It's like we don't have it so good right now. And it's funny because we were going to talk a little bit about marriage rates, and we didn't get there to talk about African Americans and marriage rates. Now I'm reading this book called "Is Marriage for White People?" And it's by an author, I believe his name is Richard Banks. He's a Stanford professor, endowed professor at Stanford. And he's making the argument that black women, because the reason why we see so many low marriage rates in Black America is because black women are not willing to marry white men. If we want to see the rates vary between the races for marriage, black women need to marry white men. Problem with that, and I was talking on the bus earlier, the problem with his argument is that he's putting the onus on black women to say black women are the cause of these low marriage rates. He doesn't take into account that white men may not have a preference and a taste and a desire for the sisters. And then if they do, you got to decide whether or not it's going to be the biracial sister, or it's going to be the light-skinned sister, or is it then going to be the dark-skinned sister, because my colleague actually wrote a paper. And he said that dark-skinned women are less likely to get marriage proposals because of their phenotype. So it's something that exists. I'm glad you guys are talking about it, but it does in fact exist in Black America. And we don't talk about it enough though, so I'm glad you guys are having that conversation.
Good, we have time for only 2 more questions. So we'll take one up there and then one down there. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Marcus Kennedy. Referencing the most recent census results again, as we approach the inevitability of America becoming a majority nation, I don't think it's far-fetched to believe that some groups may approach what's coming on as a zero-sum game and believe that there are things to be lost or gained. My question is, what do you think those losses and or gains may be, whether they be real or imagined? And finally, is there any historical precedent of a nation's majority losing its majority, and how did that play out?
Dana?
Dana?
I don't, I was trying to think of I was trying to come up with a group. I really can't think of a situation where it is the majority has gone into the minority. I'm sure there is, but very often you have a split. The country will split in two. And pardon me?
There was an article in the New York Times today.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
I just read the Journal-Constitution. I didn't say anything in it. But I don't see what the loss would be if it's, again, it's measurement, majority, minority. When we're talking about Europeans, European Americans, we're talking about Germans and Italians who don't always get along. If we talk about Latin, we're talking about different cultures within Latin America and with Asia. It's not going to be, it's not three groups. It's a variety which we're lumping into three groups. So I don't see the problem there. I think that's cool.
I guess the point is, though, so we're talking about the minorities being the majority, but do they have power? So numerically, they have numerical power, but do they actually have power in this country? And as long as they don't have power, ain't nobody tripping. They're just not. Once they start getting some power, and then once white privilege could be threatened, then it'll become a problem. But it's not going to be. I don't think it's an issue anytime soon.
The only argument I've heard that speaks to what do you lose by having a very multicultural society like that is that if you have a very kind of monochromatic society that's homogenous, there are a lot of strong social norms, and because of that, you don't need such a litigious society. And the reason we have so much litigation is because we don't have these common social norms that guide our behavior. But I think that's a bunch of crock, so I don't really buy into that.
Hi there, my name is Lydia Bell, and I am a student at Emory University. And I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. And so growing up in the South, I was exposed to some of the more jaded viewpoints concerning race. And I was wondering, your personal opinion, do you believe our preoccupation with race is an ingrained need to organize and give a name to a thing? Or is it a learned behavior passed on from generation to generation, even if we don't realize we're doing it?
Good question.
Definitely learned.
And
I disagree. I'd say
it's learned. It's learned. I mean, you get kids in sandbox, you get them in the sandbox, and you leave them alone, and they're great. And then they start to learn the behavior, because basically everything we do is a learned behavior. Even breathing, if they don't help you breathe, learn how to breathe.
Yeah, we have the sex talk with kids, we have the drug talk, and we don't have the race talk with kids, except to say, don't call people bad names who don't look like you. And so kids are just watching us to see how we behave, and then they watch TV, and then they put all the rules together themselves, and they learn how to discriminate. They learn difference in the worst way through silence.
I don't necessarily disagree, but what I would say is that how we differentiate and categorize people is a learned behavior, but the need to categorize itself, I think, is a human phenomenon. I mean, we do that implicitly because we're cognitively limited, right? So we have to find heuristics to make things like snap judgments, because we don't have the time and the resources to be able to fully understand everything.
And Lydia, I think part of the problem is that whether or not it's learned behavior or not, there's real consequences to it. So that's where I hinge my hat. It's like, okay, whether or not you want to classify whether it's learned or not, it's innate, it doesn't matter to me so much. All I know is that there's a penalty for certain racial and ethnic groups. When whites have 20% of the wealth as blacks and 18% of the wealth as Latinos, it's a penalty. So that's what is slightly more, not to say your question isn't amazing, but I think that's where I would probably start the discussion, at the consequences.
Dana, you want to wrap it up? Go ahead.
Oh.
Not really.
If you don't want to wrap it up, I'll wrap it up. And you know how all of us, please sit down, because there's no more questions from the audience. All of us have moments in our lives that we will always remember. And I'll wrap this up with one moment in my life that I will always remember. And it just flashed back to me as we were, that last question. My daughter was in first grade, Farmland Elementary School, in Montgomery County, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., public school. And she's excited. She's in first grade. She'd come home every day and she'd tell us about the teachers, and tell us about all the other kids. And then she became best friends with Catherine. And she'd tell us about Catherine. Catherine's great, and we're doing this, and she's so nice. And we would say, well, what does Catherine look like? Oh, she's so cute, and she's nice, and she's got beautiful eyes, and she wears really nice little dresses. And she would tell us all. For weeks, we're hearing about Catherine. So one day, my wife says, well, maybe Catherine and Alana should have a play day or something. So she calls up the mother, and my job is to drive my daughter to Catherine's house, which is 4 blocks away or whatever, on a Saturday afternoon. And the girls were going to, my daughter was going to spend the afternoon there playing. So I bring her there Saturday afternoon, drive in the driveway, ring the doorbell, and an African-American colonel in full uniform is standing there. And I'm saying to myself, maybe I have the wrong address, I don't know. And then an African-American woman walks out, and I said, I'm Wolf Blitzer. We were told Catherine lives here. Oh yeah, that's my daughter. And the African-American mother comes to the door. And all of these weeks, my daughter is talking about Catherine, her best friend in first grade, and she never tells us, because I come home, I drop her off, she stays there. I come home and I say to my wife, I say, did you know that Catherine is black? And she said, no. And I said, Alana never said no. And I said to myself, and I said to my wife, I said, you know what? Isn't that great? That this little girl, 6 years old, in describing Catherine all of these weeks, never told us that her best friend was black. Now, that was a proud moment for me, and it stayed with me all of these years. And unfortunately, that moment doesn't always happen for everyone else, but it was a good moment. And it's a moment I'll leave you with, as I want to thank you very much for coming here. I want to thank, first of all, our panel. Let's give it up for the panel. Keep the applause going. Heidi. You like Heidi? Edward. Ewell. Chris. Dana. Bravo. Big round of applause. Thank you very much. I want to thank our panelists. Obviously, I want to thank the James Weldon Johnson Institute at Emory University. Did I mention that my daughter went on to Emory University and spent 4 excellent years here in Atlanta studying, majoring in psychology at Emory University?
You didn't say anything about the tuition.
Emory University took a lot of my money. That's all right. I want to thank Atlanta's National Center for Civil and Human Rights. I want to thank CNN, my favorite news organization. I'll see you tomorrow in the Situation Room. Thanks very much. Please.
I was a student at Buffalo when I was teaching there.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.